Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. We caught up earlier today with Luke Alexander. He's the CEO of Nucor Gold, formerly Pinecrest. It's another Ghanaian gold exploration story, but one with a difference. Quite an impressive board with a stack of money, with a plan. So we find out more. So if you want our thoughts and opinions on that conversation, their plans, and indeed the company itself, you can find that at cruxinvestor.com/club. Do go and have a look. We also have detailed company reports on there and analysis. There's summaries of interviews that we've done just to save you some time. There's training courses to help you with your diligence process, plus commentary from experts from around the world on a variety of companies and commodities, which you might find interesting. Plus, of course, our thriving community of investors sharing their thoughts and ideas with each other in a nice, friendly, civil environment. If it sounds nice, go and check it out at cruxinvestor.com/club. And we'd love your feedback too. So give us a like, we appreciate it. Leave your comments below. We'll get back to absolutely everyone. And if you want to see precisely what we talked about today, do take a look in the description below. Luke, how you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing great. How about yourself, Matt?
Hanging in there. It's end of the day here. Where in the world are you?
Start of my day.
Start of your day, I know.
I'm in Vancouver, so it's the start of my day. But get to spend a lot of time speaking with people in London and Europe. So my days always start early, which is nice.
Well, you know London well. You were over here for a long time, 12 years. Do you miss it?
Yeah, spent 12 years on mostly on the kind of sell side, investment banking side of the business in London. And then moved to Vancouver, I guess it was in 2017. So, yeah, and then this pandemic's meant that it's been the longest time I haven't been in London for 15 plus years. But luckily, still have a lot of good friends and contacts there, so get to stay connected that way.
Cool. Do you know what? You're missing nothing. Absolutely nothing. We're locked down hard over here.
But you're doing very well from a vaccination perspective. So I might need to use my British passport to come over there and get vaccinated at some point.
That's literally the one thing we got right. The rest of it, an absolute nightmare. This one thing, the distribution of the vaccine, actually doing quite well. So, every silver cloud, we need a disaster to actually show how capable we are at times. Hey, well, first time I've heard the story. Glad to have you on the show. West African story, which I'm always intrigued by. Before we kind of get into it, though, give me that 1 minute overview of the business, and then I'll pick it up from there.
Yeah, so Nucor, we've got the Enchi project in Ghana. It's a district scale exploration project. Currently have a 1.2 million ounce inferred resource. We're currently doing a 58,000 meter drill program, which is the largest ever drill program on the project. So high level, that's the overview.
Beautiful. So you're hunting gold. Is it Barremian greenstone? Is that the sort of general area we should be thinking about?
Yeah, greenstone. So we're on the Sefwi Bibiani belt. So good neighbors along the belt. We've got Kinross's Toronto mine to the north of us, Bibiani to the north of that, and then Ahafo. All of them sit on that Sefwi Bibiani belt. And it's greenstone hosted rocks.
Right. Okay. But this is a relatively new story in the sense that you're new, you came in last May, you raised some money, second half of last year as well. Well, at the beginning of the year, but also a significant piece at the second half of last year. You're going to need to do something different because there's a lot of Barremian greenstone belt stories out there. So what's so different about you guys?
I mean, in terms of, we've had this project for a number of years. So we're a new story in the sense that when I came in as CEO of Pinecrest at the time last May, and then we relaunched as Nucor in August of last year. I mean, that was really to show the market that we're recommitting fully to the Enchi project in Ghana. Greg Smith came back in May as full-time VP Exploration. Doug Forrester stepped up as chairman. And I think that really kind of woke the market's eyes up to the opportunity that we had and that was being overlooked at Enchi ultimately. And, as you know, having been an investment banker in London for a number of years and covered the mining space, a lot of times what ends up happening is it's companies like ours where the project's been around for 20 years, but the historical work that's been done on it ultimately is very valuable for us, and us being able to raise capital to ultimately really aggressively drill is what unlocks significant value. So that's probably one of the big differentiators, is that we've been able to raise significant capital to put into the ground to really extract a lot of value. So again, 58,000 meter drill program, that's more drilling than's been done over the last 25 years on this project. But needless to say, all of that work that's been done over the last 25 years feeds our geological understanding of the project, and I think is one of the things that ultimately reduces exploration risk and helps differentiate us from a brand new greenfield project out there.
Okay, I'll give you that. So when you came aboard in May, share price, rocketed, went up to 80, 90 cents, settled around sort of 60 cents today. That was also a positive, it was a bull environment for gold. The gold price was good. Do you think you just hit that at the right time? Do you think you raised the money at the right time? Because the stock has settled down now. People are waiting for you to do something, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, in May, I would argue is trading basically as a shell company. I mean, it had a $10-12 million valuation, and part of the kind of due diligence I did when I was looking a lot more seriously at this opportunity was to speak with a number of the investment bankers who are friends and people I've worked with for years, as well as a handful of kind of fund managers and analysts who I've known for years as well, and talked to them about the Enchi project. And most of them had either completely forgotten about it or hadn't heard about it at all. So, I mean, out of the gates, that means that you've got an opportunity that's being completely overlooked by the market. And I think is, again, part of the reason why I say that, it was ultimately trading as a shell company. But when you looked at it, and I looked at it more closely at the time, I mean, you're sitting on 1.1 million ounces of inferred resource at the time, primarily in the oxide and transitional category. So 95% in that oxide and transitional material, which, as you know, and a lot of your listeners will know, ultimately lends itself to a heap leach operation, which ultimately means it's much lower capital. And, I looked at the opportunity and said, this is a great opportunity. Stepped in, obviously, at that point. Yes, the stock significantly re-rated, but I think that kind of took it to what was ultimately fair value for what the Enchi project was at the time. And I would now argue that we've added significant value through the drill bit, as well as a significant capital markets de-risking that we've done over the last 6 months. And we can get into that. I'm sure you'll be asking questions along those lines as well, in terms of analyst coverage and investors that we've got supporting us and so on and so forth. So those would be, a few of the things I'd highlight from that perspective.
Okay, but if I look back, then you were able to pick up the phone to some of the great and the good, and some of the roughers of this world, and all the names of people that one would expect you to know, having worked in London, to give you that kind of kick start. I think the question you need to answer is, people have forgotten about this asset because there's 1.2 million ounces of inferred. Did this just need money, which you're definitely able to get? You've demonstrated that. Or are you coming at it a different way?
So combination of both. I mean, you can have the best plan in the world and you can have the greatest rocks in the world, but if you can't put a hole into them to show the market what kind of grade they are, it's pointless, right? So I would argue that it's a combination of both, right? So being able to attract capital is one thing, and we've been very successful at that. We raised $3 million in May. That led to an 8,000 meter drill program. We then raised an additional $15 million, closed that early November. That gave us the opportunity to add another 50,000 meters of drilling, plus have capital to execute on a PEA as well as an updated resource at the end of the year. So that gave us, the balance sheet to be able to go out and aggressively drill this project. So on the capital side, yes, absolutely, that's crucial. In terms of how we're approaching it, the fact that we have that capital allows us to do a lot of drilling that, on a more limited budget, you may not do. So we're taking a multi-pronged exploration approach. So we're continuing to expand on the existing resource areas that we have. And we view that as kind of low-hanging fruit. So ultimately stepping out along strike, stepping into some very large kilometer long gaps within some of the pits that we have. And we've put press releases out in January on that. And then as well, going back to some areas that were previously drilled. So areas like Quachikram, Kogina Hill, and Arati. We've historically had very good drill results from those, and we've been able to allocate part of our 58,000 meters to go back to those areas. If we look at Quachikram, for example, very good past drilling there. We've now put out 27 holes as part of our current 58,000 meter drill program. We've continued to have very good success, and an area like that will most likely be our next resource area. And then the last thing I'll just mention in terms of that multi-pronged exploration approach is that for the first time ever, we're starting to drill at depth. So we had our first diamond rig show up in December. We've had 2 additional diamond rigs show up. So we've now, one additional and 1 more showing up. So we've now got 2 diamond rigs drilling, and we're starting to put some deeper holes onto the project. So down to kind of 250, 350 meters, which for us is deep. But again, for you and your listeners, you'll appreciate that that's still just scratching the surface. But if you look at these greenstone hosted deposits, and you look at Toronto to the north of us and Bibiani to the north of that, and Ahafo, where you really see them start to grow in size is once you get down at depth, and also you start to typically see them increase in grade. So that's the other thing that, from an approach perspective, having that capital has given us the ability to drill deep and allocate dollars to that, but at the same time continuing to expand those ounces at surface within the oxides and transitional zone.
Okay, but Ghana is prolific in terms of production. I think it overtook South Africa. It's in your PowerPoint. You talk about that, and fairly homogeneous distribution of oxide ore, relatively shallow in the sorts of grades that you're finding. And there's lots of companies doing that. As I said, it's hard to know where to focus your attention. So what's your model? Are you just trying to build up a measured and indicated resource and then make yourself attractive to someone to come in and take you out? Because you all can't fund mills and production and all the capex requirements here. And most companies don't. They get taken out. So what's your model?
So our current focus is on exploration, and when you go through our presentations, and hopefully some of the highlights that I just touched on really show you that it's a true district scale opportunity. I mean, 25 targets, and we're systematically approaching our exploration to de-risk it and ultimately add ounces and create as much shareholder value as possible. But with the goal of ultimately growing this to a 4 or 5 million ounce resource. So that's our current focus, is build this to a 4 or 5 million ounce resource, which, as you know, ultimately at that stage, you're 200,000 ounces per year over a 20-25 year mine life. And that becomes the kind of project that is attractive to mid caps, majors. And at that stage, we would still most likely have significant exploration upside. So that's the kind of thing that's attractive. That being said, the motivation for us to continue to update our economic studies, which I highlighted, we're currently updating our PEA, which we'll put out in Q2 of this year, is to continue to underpin the value of the company with solid fundamentals through those economic studies. And if at some point, we see a heap leach scenario, which is manageable for us from a capital perspective, and we think will create significant value for our shareholders, then we may at that point pivot and decide to go into a heap leach production situation and continue to drill at the same time. And one of the nice things about having the institutional support that we have, as well as the support from the investment banking community, is that yes, I mean, that does require a lot of capital, but as you know, heap leach operations require a lot less capital than milling operations. So that could potentially be a scenario that we would ultimately look at. But the main message is, for now, we're really focused on exploration. And that's where we think for, the foreseeable future, we'll be able to create the most value. But in the back of our minds, as 32% owners of the business, management and insiders, we think as shareholders first. And if there's a scenario where we go, this actually, we think will create more value, then that's the kind of thing that we'll explore in a lot more detail.
Okay, I don't doubt you know what to do in terms of what the market needs to hear. I'm just interested in, have you set out from day one with a business plan? Over and above exploration, you got Doug Foster on there, you got some Calibre guys on there. They're a big producer in Canada. This may not be their jurisdiction of choice, but I'm just wondering, what are the conversations that you have? Because it's quite a big board, right? You've got 8 board directors on there. There must be conversations.
In terms of the business plan?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is the business plan. It's, let's drill out this 58,000 meters. Let's significantly expand the resource. Let's look to make some new discoveries at a number of these targets that we've worked up and have either previously drilled or are going to drill for the first time ever. And let's start to test the opportunity at depth through the deeper drilling that we're doing. So that is the kind of business plan. It's focus on growing the overall resource, and at the same time continuing to update those economic studies to create a further underpinning of value for the company, and ultimately start to look at what, in more detail, what a production scenario would look like.
Is there anything that's frustrating you? You've got all this coverage, right? It's probably, people you've known for years, and you've got some good coverage, and most juniors struggle with that for a long, long time. You've got it, and you've got access to the capital markets because you know how to position it. I get that. But are you not frustrated with the fact that the price hasn't really moved since the end of last year? What is it? Because you've been putting out tons of results. I mean, these are good results. These are good numbers, good solid numbers. But what's missing?
I mean, in terms of, frustration, I mean, ultimately, ultimately at the end of the day, you can only execute on your business plan and ultimately get out there and do the best job possible for shareholders. I mean, I've watched the kind of mining sector for 15, 20 years. And ultimately, I mean, that's the reality of the sector, is that it'll move with the price of gold, and there'll be times where there's less interest and more interest. But our kind of approach and my view is that if we fundamentally continue to execute on our drill program, we continue to get Nucor out there in front of investors, that ultimately the company will re-rate over time. And that's one of the nice things and fortunate things that we've got at the moment is, I mean, if you look at our 58,000 meter program, we're fully funded through this year to execute on that program, to get our PEA out, to ultimately, get an updated resource done at the end of the year. So, whether the price is at 60, 70, 80 cents, I mean, it's not like we're looking to raise capital at the moment. Yes, we would like to see the share price higher, but our view is that ultimately over time it just re-rates, and as long as you're continuing to add fundamental value, which we believe we are through the drill bit, then that re-rate will ultimately happen.
Right, and the new or updated PEA Q2 should be one of those moments. Yep,
that's what I'd expect. And I mean, your viewers can go and look at the 5 covering brokers on our in our presentation, and go look up the research and so on and so forth, and come up with your own views in terms of where we sit relative to other companies out there. I mean, if I look at it from where I sit, putting my former institutional sales hat on, we're trading at about $25, $26 per ounce in the ground. Again, that's based on the 1.2 million ounce updated resource that we put out last year. So it doesn't include any of the, call it 20,000, 25,000 meters of drilling and results that we've put out to date, or, the fact that we're going to be putting out an updated PEA as well. So from that perspective, I mean, your listeners got to go make up their own minds. But that's kind of where I see things sitting today.
Okay. Management and insiders, 32% significant holding. Is that because of some kind of cute structuring at the beginning, or have you guys been actually plowing cold hard cash into this thing?
So a number of the insiders and the board have been putting money in alongside investors for the last 10 years. Myself, when I joined, I wrote a large check into the company alongside other investors. So we put our money in alongside other investors. When we raised additional capital in November, we put more money in. And if you look at some of the insider transactions, you'll see that some of the management and board have been recently buying as well. So no, and the long answer is no. This isn't some deal where we gave ourselves a whole pile of stock at a penny and then turned around and looked to raise money at 60, 70, 80 cents from the market. We've always written checks alongside of other investors, and that's what we'll continue to do. And I think that's important. I mean, you need to be able to sit across the table from investors and say that you're truly aligned. And I think that's the best way for alignment is to write checks alongside them.
Okay, that's the reason I asked you, because you made a big deal of it in your PowerPoint. You used that word aligned, and loads of CEOs say it. Right, but they pay themselves a big salary and then they go and buy some shares in the market. Do you know what I mean? So I think I wanted you to be clear about the way that you did it, and I believe that you have done it the right way.
Yeah, and I mean on that front, I'd encourage people to go look at our G&A as well. I mean, we run an extremely lean G&A, and again, as shareholders of the business, we want to get as many meters into the ground as possible because that's where we think will ultimately create the most value. So, that's the other point.
Well, let's talk about it. So how much do you pay the board? How much does the board pick up?
Well, the board isn't paid anything. So the board's just remunerated with either options or PSUs.
Right. Okay. Good stuff.
And I think for an exploration stage company, that's ultimately the way it should be. I mean, for producing companies, it's different, but for exploration, that's the that's the way it should be.
It should be.
And the reality is, I mean, the board are all significant shareholders. I mean, they all have written big checks into the company. So the shareholding would be the biggest motivating factor more than anything else.
You've been around the block. It should be, and it is in your case, but it usually isn't.
No, I understand, and again, I've heard investors gripe about that for 15 plus years, so it wouldn't be right for me to go and set something up where ultimately you kind of you don't take that into account.
Okay, well, look, I appreciate your time. I just want to ask you one more question, and that's around Greg Smith. I know you said he came back in. Just give people a sense of why he's important to this, because like the grades have been coming out, the drill results coming out. You're communicating to the market regularly. It's all good, but why is he important to the team?
Well, I think everyone's heard my background, so he's important for the team because ultimately you don't want me deciding where the holes go. So that's probably the first thing. But listen, I mean, Greg's got over 35 years of exploration experience. I mean, he was actually running Calibre up until they did that transformative acquisition with B2 Gold, and it became a production company. At that point, we were very fortunate that he decided to come and join us as full-time VP exploration. Greg has worked on our Enchi project on and off for the past 10 years, so he knows it as well as anybody out there, and that's very important. But he's also worked in these types of greenstone hosted, deposits around the world. So he's got a lot of experience from that perspective. So yeah, needless to say, he's a crucial part of the team. And then I'd also highlight our team on the ground in country. I mean, Dan Wilson, he's a crucial part of our team. Dan's worked on our Enchi project on and off for the past 20 years. He worked with Redback in the early 2000s, then left and worked all over Africa. And then he came back and joined us in 2010 and has been with the project ever since. As well as we've got a lot of very senior geologists who've worked all over Africa on site. And I think that's one of the things about Ghana is you're able to attract very talented individuals, given the long history of production and exploration that there is in the country, and the desire for people to be living in Ghana.
Yeah, no, it's a great country, great people, very, very, very friendly. Worked there myself. Actually, I said last question. Of course, I'm going to ask you one more. You know that, don't you? So I noticed the OTCQX listing, which is great. We've seen a lot of companies do this, and it's a kind of really, and as a markets guy, I'm interested in this answer. It's been a sort of unusual start to the year. We've seen the kind of GameStop incident, the whole Reddit thing, and silver short squeezes being attempted, and it's unusual times, right? And there's a lot of companies also going to the OTC, Canadian companies, Australian companies, UK companies. They're seeing it as the solution to some of their problems. Why did you guys want to do it?
For us, the main motivation is we've got a lot of individuals following us in the U.S. and who are very interested in Nucor, and we wanted to be able to give them ultimately an easier way to buy our stock. Not everybody can buy TSX Venture stock, and if you look at the U.S., it's still the biggest market on the planet from a securities perspective. So that was the main motivation for us to list on the OTC.
Is it working for you?
Yeah, it's been working relatively well. So, I mean, I think like anything, we had some very good volume out of the gate. We continue to see some decent volume. But with all these things, I think there's ultimately an initial kind of analysis, and then you review it after 3, 6, and 12 months, and kind of look at it from that perspective. But yeah, so far we've been pleased with it.
It's not expensive, is it?
No, I mean, when you look at a $15 million budget for exploration and all the rest of it, I mean, some of this stuff isn't expensive. But that being said, every dollar that we spend, we make sure that we do proper analysis and all the rest of it, because you don't want to be wasting money anywhere, because that could be the next meter that could find the next discovery, right? So relatively speaking, it's not prohibitively expensive, but you still want to make sure it's return on investment when you do spend those dollars.
Quite right too. Okay, Luke, great catch up. Appreciate you telling the story. New to us, we'll do a bit more digging as well. Good luck with the drilling. Seems to be going well. Look forward to more of the same. Yeah,
absolutely. Maybe the last thing I'll just leave your listeners with is I'd encourage anyone to go and check out our website, nucorgold.com, and also would encourage you to follow us on either LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or all of them. We put out a lot of content, and a lot of investors and prospective investors seem to have found that very useful. And ultimately, we're always keen to engage with investors and prospective investors. So please feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer any questions, and we'll kind of take it from there. And definitely appreciate you taking the time today, Matt.